all my contract details will be shared at the end of this webinar in our final slide. So jumping right into it now, in terms of a broad agenda for this morning's webinar, I'm going to be covering off on 3 main points. The first topic that we're going to discuss is why should you use a HIA contract in the first place? What are the range of benefits associated with the utilisation of the HIA contract products when carrying out building works, whether it be residential works or commercial works? I'm then going to talk about the actual legal requirements for builders to use contracts for home building works. So these are the requirements existing under the home building contracts legislation in Western Australia, and that legislation is administered by the Western Australian Building Commission, who monitor and enforce compliance with the legislation in this regard. So I'll be going into some of the specific details on the circumstances where contracts are required by the home building legislation and what the contents of those contracts needs to include. And finally, I'll go through with you in detail how to actually select a HIA contract, so matching up the particular contracts on offer with the specific particular types of building works that they are geared towards. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll be having a Q&A session whereby you can type specific questions into the text box on your screen, which Kerry will read out to me and I'll endeavour to answer. And you can also contact me personally after the webinar if you'd like to discuss any queries with me in a more one-to-one fashion. So really, to get started here, to break the ice in terms of thinking about why are contracts important, well, the reason it's important to utilise a contract when carrying out building works is because all parties need to work to the same written roadmap, which contains clear guidelines as well as a clear set of rules in order for the project to be successful. So the purpose of the contract is to provide that written roadmap so that everybody is on the same page as to how the project is to proceed, and in the event that a dispute arises during the course of the project, how that is actually to be resolved. Now, there's a raft of benefits and rationales for utilisation of a contract. So in this flowchart here, I'm going to cover off on a number of the really key salient points here. One of the key purposes of a contract is to outline a date for when the work is actually to be completed and also when a work's to commence on site. So locking in those specific dates so that both parties are working towards that. Also, one of the key purposes of a contract is to clearly delineate the actual proposed scope of building works to be carried out in order to ensure that there's no confusion or no misunderstanding by the client as to the building product they are to receive. The contract will be very clearly and very specifically outlining specifically what it is that you as the builder or principal contractor are going to be doing for your clients. Now, another key benefit is setting the actual contract price. So what price is going to be nominated in exchange for you carrying out various building works. And in most cases, this is going to be a fixed price unless, of course, you choose to progress your project on a cost-plus basis, and we'll deal with that a little bit more specifically later on. But certainly a key benefit and a key purpose of a contract is locking in that contract price. Also, of great importance to members is that a contract will set out how and also when progress payments are to occur. It will establish key dates for when payment is to be made by the client upon the achievement of key milestones in the overall project, and the client will have a certain period of time within which to make that payment. Otherwise, they'll be deemed to be in default under your agreement, and as the builder or the principal contractor, you'll have certain rights that then become available to you to exercise in order to recover payments that are due to you. Another key purpose of the contract, and this is now entering more into the territory of administration, the day-to-day administration of the job, the purpose of the contract is to outline what is to happen in the event that there are delays. What happens if there are unforeseen circumstances which cause the time for the works to be completed to actually be blown out? For example, if there's inclement weather, for instance, what are the processes and procedures to be agreed on between the parties to deal with what happens if there's a delay? That's another key benefit of a contract. In a similar vein, how are variations to be managed? What happens if the client wants you to utilize a different material? What happens if that different material is going to substantially add to or subtract from the overall contracted price? How is this to be administered? And also, and I suppose against the backdrop of all these other factors that a contract goes towards dealing with, is a contract assists in avoiding disputes. And of course, it assists in avoiding disputes really by way of outlining that written roadmap containing all the clear guidelines and rules for how the project is to be carried out. Now, jumping into HIA contracts now, against that backdrop as to why it's important to be utilising a contract for carrying out building works, the Housing Industry Association has a vast suite of industry standard form building contracts. And these contracts are for a range of different types of works. There's residential contracts that the HIA has on offer for building a brand new house, or renovating, altering, extending or adding to an existing house, such as carrying out a renovation or adding on a granny flat, for example. There's also HIA contracts on offer to members for manufacturing a prefabricated home, and also the installation of a modular prefabricated home on a particular building site. In addition, the HIA has available to members a standard form building contract for building or installing kitchen cabinetry, bathrooms, as well as works involving laundries as well. Now that's the suite of residential contracts on offer. The HIA also has commercial works contracts, whether you're doing commercial works on a fixed fee basis or a cost plus basis. And furthermore, the HIA has a suite of subcontracting agreements to be utilised when, during the course of works, you need to formally engage subcontractors, say on an individual project to carry out specific works, or alternatively, if you're looking at engaging a subcontractor for a period of time to work on multiple contracts, multiple jobs under your control. Now, why specifically utilise HIA contracts when carrying out works, when looking at signing up a client for your next building projects? Now, there's really 7 key reasons that I've distilled for the purposes of this webinar. The first one is the reputation of the Housing Industry Association and its contracts. The HIA contracts have been industry standard form contracts for decades. They're widely known and accepted in not only the industry, but also amongst consumers, and they're also well known to regulators such as the Western Australian Building Commission. The contracts themselves are legally compliant. They're compliant with the detailed legislative regulation which exists in the residential building and construction industry, and the contracts are often reviewed to ensure ongoing legal compliance when there's changes to the law. The contracts are also practical. They've been drafted in consultation with industry over an extended period of time and reflect accepted building practices and methods of working in the residential building and construction industry in Western Australia. Furthermore, and this really ties in with our earlier slide dealing with what is the fundamental purpose, what is the fundamental benefit of utilising a contract. One of the key benefits of the HIA's suite of contracts, is that they assist in the management and time of costs. So the HIA contracts contain machinery and various other mechanisms in place to assist in managing the interaction of time and the interaction of cost in the overall building process, as well as externalities, so external factors such as weather and other potential causes of delay. So to break that down in further detail, the HIA contracts contain a raft of contractual administration machinery, such as terms dealing with how are variations to be dealt with in the event that the owner, the client, proposes a variation, how is it to be costed, in what circumstances can the builder issue a requirement for a variation in the event that there are unforeseen circumstances, in what cases can the price be escalated, the contract price be escalated in the event that there's a delay in works being carried out on site due to reasons attributable to the client themselves. What happens if the time for commencement is going to be delayed? What happens if the time to complete the works is going to be delayed due to, say, a shortage of trades in the industry, or inclement weather, or a whole raft of other factors that could affect the timing of the project and the cost? So this is one of the very key benefits of the HIA contracts in terms of the level of detail in respect of the machinery for contractual administration. Fifthly, another key benefit is the issue of industry consultation. So as I alluded to earlier, the HIA suite of contracts have been developed after very significant industry consultation and collaboration. They've been developed and refined over many, many decades, both in Western Australia and across Australia. So they have the benefit of being up to date with industry views and building practices, as well as legal regulatory requirements. And in terms of our final two benefits, because the HIA contracts have been around for so long, for absolutely decades, many of the contracts have had the opportunity to be interpreted and tested by the courts and have their validity confirmed. And furthermore, the contracts are consistently kept up to date. The HIA has its own processes and procedures in place internally for ensuring that the contracts are updated to respond to industry issues, and also to protect our members from any changes to the law, such as changes to the building legislation, the home building contracts legislation, as well as various regulations operating in the residential building and construction space. Now, having talked about the purpose of utilising a contract and the benefits of the Housing Industry Association suite of contracts, I'm now going to start talking about how do you actually choose a contract for a particular project. What kind of considerations do you need to have in mind when making this choice of contract decision? Well, your choice of contract is really going to depend upon three key factors. The first is going to be the actual nature of the works. So what exactly is it that you're going to be carrying out for a client? Is it going to be residential works? Is it going to be commercial works? Will you be building a new structure? Will you be altering or extending an existing structure? Consideration will also need to be given to the complexity of the works. So the more complex the works are going to be, the more machinery that needs to be in place to deal with issues of costing and issues of contractual administration, to really take into account the fact that a particular project is going to be more complex. So the level of detail in your contract will need to match the complexity of the particular job. And furthermore, and this is a very key consideration which needs to be taken into account when choosing which contract to utilise, the question you need to ask yourself is whether or not the contract value of this particular project is going to bring the works within the coverage of the Home Building Contracts Act 1991. So the Home Building Contracts legislation, it's essentially the consumer protection legislation which operates in the residential building and construction industry in Western Australia, and the legislation mandates the use of contracts in specific circumstances. Now, delving into the detail of the HBCA, the Home Building Contracts Act, the starting point here is that you are legally required under the Act to use a written contract with a client, which includes a number of terms and conditions if you are going to be carrying out what's known as home building work or associated home building work for an owner, and the value of the works is between $7,500 and $500,000. So if you're carrying out residential building work or associated work between $7,500 and $500,000, then the Home Building Contract Act is going to apply to your job, and you'll be required by law to utilise a contract when entering into an agreement with a client to carry out those home building works. What do home building works actually entail? Home building works, for the purposes of the legislation, includes not only building a new home, but it also includes renovating, altering, or improving an existing home. And associated home building work essentially means works that are associated with either building a new home or, for example, altering or extending or adding to a home in some way. So associated works includes things such as constructing a garage, pools and fences, landscaping, things which are associated with a home in some way and are valued between $7,500 and $500,000. Now, the HIA suite of contracts, following on from that outline of the home building contracts legislation, the HIA contracts are drafted to be compliant with all of the various requirements of the home building contracts legislation. And this, of course, is with a view to ensuring that as a member, you meet and satisfy your obligations as a builder in this regard when contracting with owners to carry out residential building works or associated home building works for them. How do you then select a specific HIA contract for a job? So we talked about before the general kind of indicia to have regard to when choosing a contract. You should have regard to, amongst other things, the nature of the works. Is it residential? Is it commercial? What the level of complexity of the works is. What's the contract value? Is this job going to be subject to the home building contracts legislation in Western Australia? Against that backdrop, how do you then select your HIA contract for a job? Well, the HIA has developed a vast suite of professional building contracts, and these are targeted at broad categories of particular types of works. So there's contracts in place for projects less than $7,500. There's also contracts which are drafted specifically for residential projects valued at between $7,500 and $500,000. So contracts for where the Home Building Contract Act is going to apply, in other words. There's then contracts which apply for residential projects valued at over $500,000 and above. And HIA also has a contract in place for entering into an agreement with a client solely for the purposes of preparing plans, drawings, and sketches to then enable you to, at a later date, enter into, for example, a residential building contract with them to say, build a new home or renovate an existing home. So we're going to talk now about some of the HIA contracts which fall within these broad categories of contracts which the Housing Industry Association has on offer. Now, for HIA contracts for residential projects less than $7,500, the HIA has two key contracts, and these are suitable in particular for small works, works in the nature of maintenance and repairs to structures and homes valued under $7,500. There's the small works contract, so that's for jobs up to $7,500. It has detailed provisions dealing with progress claims, for example, whereas then there's also the job quotation form, and this is for much simpler jobs under $7,500. For example, if there's not going to be the need to have multiple progress payments under a contract, it's simply a case that you're going to be, for instance, performing maintenance work for a fixed price of, say, $1,200, where you don't need the same level of contractual machinery in place to deal with the administration of that job. So that's a situation where you might choose to use the job quotation form over the small works contract, whereas a small works contract would be most applicable in circumstances where there might be the taking of multiple progress claims. So, for example, you're going to be carrying out installation of a retaining wall and a fence, and you're also going to be replacing guttering at the home and carrying out other works where you're going to be wanting to charge specific progress claims to correspond to the achievement of key milestones in that overall scope of works. Now, for contracts for agreements to carry out residential projects between $7,500 and $500,000, so of course this is where the home building contracts legislation applies, there's a broad selection of contracts on offer depending upon the specific nature of the residential works you're going to be undertaking. Now, to begin with, there's a contract called the HBCA lump sum building contract. This is a fixed price lump sum contract specifically geared towards building a new home. It's only to be used for building a brand new home, and it's drafted to be compliant with all of the various requirements of the Home Building Contracts Act, and contains a raft of contractual machinery for the purposes of assisting you in administering an agreement to build a new home. There's also a HBCA lump sum alterations and additions contract. Now, this is specifically drafted for the purposes of carrying out works in the nature of renovations, alterations and additions for a client. And as a consequence, it contains some very specific terms and conditions, such as terms to deal with the situation whereby the owner, the client, might still be living in the home at the time that you're actually renovating it. How do you deal with issues of access to site in that situation? How do you deal with issues of possession to site, and ensuring that the client doesn't go into, for example, areas which are under construction and risk sustaining injury? How do you deal with those kinds of access issues? This particular contract also contains very specific terms dealing with the situation of what happens if the client wants to direct you to utilise their own tradespeople in the carrying out of the renovation works, or if the client wants to supply their own materials that they've sourced and want for you as the builder to use those materials in carrying out their renovation. HIA also has a specific contract for utilisation for supply and installation in respect of residential kitchens, bathrooms and laundries. The contract contains a raft of terms and conditions which are very specific to carrying out works in this industry. So, for example, terms to deal with what happens if you deliver some expensive cabinetry to site and the next day your client goes bankrupt, and the person who's administering the bankruptcy seeks to seize those cabinets which have been unpaid. What are your rights then as the principal contractor to recover those unpaid for cabinets or other materials on site? And there's also terms and conditions in this contract dealing with issues such as what happens if the materials you're supplying differ somewhat to, for example, the materials that the client inspected at the time of contracting you to carry out the work. So, for example, natural materials like natural stone, woodwork, for example, may have natural variations in the grain or in the stone, and it's important that there's terms and conditions in place within the contract to deal with the risk of it eventuating that there's differences and variations in those natural materials. HIA also has a minor works contract. Now, the minor works contract is really for carrying out smaller scale residential jobs, generally up to a value of around $30,000. So it's drafted specifically to take into account the specific circumstances of smaller residential jobs up to this particular financial threshold. And this contract is particularly suitable to use if you're carrying out associated home building works. For example, you're going to be building a garage, you're doing a pergola, a patio extension, you're going to be doing discrete roofing work, for example. You're going to be carrying out outdoor tiling and paving, for example. It's really there for smaller scale residential jobs, which are nevertheless still caught up in the application of the Home Building Contracts Act, because the job is valued between $7,500 and $500,000, and therefore a contract's required to be utilised. HIA also has available to members a specific cost plus contract. Now this is a contract to be used in an alternative to the lump sum building contracts. If you and your clients choose to agree to carry out the job on a non-fixed fee basis, so on a cost plus basis, whereby you're entitled to charge the client for the costs that you incur in carrying out the works, plus an additional amount, an additional margin on top of that, then the HIA cost plus contract would be most suitable in these circumstances. And the contract contains very detailed provisions dealing with the actual costs associated with carrying out the works, which you as the builder are entitled to claim as part of the cost of the works and obtain payment from the client for. And finally, in terms of the contracts on offer for residential projects between $7,500 and $500,000, the HIA has a prefabricated homes contract. Now, this contract contains very specific terms dealing with issues of constructing a home off-site and then the transportation of it to your client's site and then the actual installation of it on that site. So it's important that if you're carrying out a job of that nature, you utilize this specific contract which contains the required terms and conditions to manage the various risks and to provide the contractual machinery for administering a job where you're building the house off-site. You're then having to transport it to site and then you're having to actually install it at the site. Now, what about for residential jobs which are valued over $500,000? There's a number of options here. You can utilize the HIA lump sum building contract. The HIA has a specific lump sum contract which is very detailed and takes into account the various risks and requirements for carrying out building a new home, a job for building a new home, which is valued over $500,000. And in circumstances where you're going to be exceeding the $500,000 threshold, you may also choose to utilize the HIA cost plus contract. The cost plus contract is suitable for use for not only residential projects valued between $7,500 and $500,000, but it's also suitable and appropriate for use for residential projects over $500,000. Now, I also mentioned in one of the earlier slides that in terms of the broad categories of contracts on offer by the HIA, there's the residential contracts for under $500,000. You've then got contracts for projects over $500,000. In addition, there's also contracts specifically for the carrying out of preliminary works. So there's a preliminary agreement. This is something that you would utilize when entering into an agreement with a client to specifically carry out the preparation of plans, the preparation of drawings, for example, conducting site contour surveys, entering into an agreement with a client specifically for the carrying out of those works. And in exchange for that, you'd obviously be getting paid a fee, which under the agreement is known as a preliminary works fee. Now, the benefit of using a preliminary agreement at the outset rather than immediately going straight to signing the client up to a formal building contract is that if you carry out the preliminary works under this specific preliminary agreement, so you do your surveys, you prepare the drawings, you obtain all necessary engineering diagrams, for example, you get paid for that, and then the client decides they don't want to proceed with the job, then at least you've been paid under this agreement for all those preliminary works. Whereas if you proceed directly to a building contract, you carry out these preliminary works and then the client decides they don't want to proceed, you're then in a position where you're going to have to seek to implement payment recovery steps to try and recover the money that you've expended in carrying out all of those various preliminary works. So it's always recommended that you utilize a preliminary agreement with the client in order to ensure that your position is protected in relation to payment for the carrying out of preliminary works. In addition, the HIA also has on offer a site inspection report form. So this is a report to be carried out at the time of looking to sign up the client, whereby you provide some indicative costings, and provide an indicative scope of works as to what's going to be required to essentially get the site ready to a point in time that it can actually be built upon, and that's known as the Form 37. In addition to the actual contracts on offer by the HIA, so in addition to the preliminary works agreements, the various contracts for residential projects over and above $500,000 and also contracts for prefabricated homes, renovations, smaller scale maintenance work, there's also then supporting documentation to support you in the administration of those contracts. Now the HIA has available to its members variation forms to be utilised for when processing variations under the contract to ensure that the terms, the price of the variation have been agreed to by all parties and that the scope of the proposed varied works have also been agreed to. The HIA also has a standard form extension of time pad for utilisation in circumstances where an event of delay has occurred or is likely to occur, and where you need to advise the client formally under the contract as to what the nature of the delay is, how it's going to affect the project, and how significantly it's going to require an extension to the actual completion date to the contract works. HIA also has standard form progress claim certificates to utilise when issuing your payment invoices to the client, and which is reflective of all the various payment terms under the HIA contracts. And very significantly, the HIA also has available a standard set of specifications for brick and framed constructions, as well as an addenda to specifications to set out your detailed costings and your detailed scope of works, which, and of course both of these documents need to be utilised when you apply to a permit authority to a local council to obtain your building permit to carry out the proposed works under your building contract. Now that really takes me to the end of today's webinar. I've talked about the importance of utilising a contract. I've talked about the circumstances in which you're required under the home building contracts legislation to implement a particular contractual arrangement. And I've also covered off on how to actually go about choosing a HIA contract for carrying out particular works. Now, in terms of actually accessing HIA stationery, so HIA contracts and the supporting documentation that I've referred to, such as the variation forms, for example, you can either purchase these directly from the HIA in a hard copy format, or alternatively, you can utilise the HIA's contracts online service to access and produce contracts. And I should note that the prices for contracts online is also substantially cheaper than the hard copy versions as well. So obviously you don't have the issue of printing costs factored into the price, and also one of the key benefits of accessing the contracts online is that it provides the convenience for you to complete the contract there and then on your screen, rather than having to physically write it all out on a hard copy contract. But nevertheless, those options are there. You can either access the contracts online, or you can purchase it hard copy if, for example, you have a client who you want to sit down with and sit down with them with the hard copy contract on the desk and fill it out together. And of course, if there's any questions that might arise in the future as to which particular contract you should be utilising for a job, you can always seek specific advice from your local workplace advisor by calling the HIA's member line on 1300 650 620. Well, thank you everybody for participating in today's webinar. I'm going to ask Kerry now to take over in facilitating a Q&A session whereby you can type any questions you have into the text box and I'll endeavour to answer them. And of course, there's also the ability to email Kerry directly after the webinar, or myself directly, with any specific questions. And we can schedule a time for me to speak to you about that question, or alternatively, if it's more convenient for you, a response can also be provided by email. Okay, Kerry.
Thanks, Michael. Oh, Michael, do you want to quickly just mention the webinar you've got next Wednesday as well for WA members?
Oh yes, thanks, Kerry. I'll also be conducting a webinar next Wednesday for Western Australian HIA members on the issue of payment disputes and how to avoid payment disputes arising under contracts or more generally with clients. So the strategies to put in place to avoid finding yourself in a situation where you're owed money and then having to expend time and resources in seeking to recover that money from a recalcitrant client.
Okay, great. Jeffrey has asked about contracts online. He said he can't see site inspection report form 37.
Okay, some of the supporting documentation isn't yet online. What I can do is always arrange for our HIA's stationary officer who administers contracts online to provide an update as to when that particular document and any others which aren't yet online will be available through the contracts online service. But if it's not yet online, then it can be accessed in hard copy format through the HIA, and there's also the ability for you to be sent an electronic copy as well.
Okay, great. And with contracts online, you can download your own logo onto the contract, I believe.
Yes, that's right. So that provides an added benefit of customising the contract as well to put your own business logo on it for when you present it to the client.
Okay, I've had a question. If the client's bank refuses to pay the deposit, can we terminate the contract?
There are provisions under the various residential building contracts setting out what is to happen if there's a default under the agreement. For example, if a progress claim isn't paid or the deposit isn't paid within the due dates under the contract. So if there's a financier involved and the payment isn't made within the due date, then in order to exit the contract, you then in turn need to put in place the various mechanisms under the contract which pave the way to being able to terminate. So you'd need to be issuing a notice of breach under the contract in the first instance in order to provide an opportunity for the breach to be remedied and the deposit to be paid as agreed under the contract.
Okay, and do you see that often people are choosing to use the wrong contract, or is it just that they're not completed correctly? What's the most common I guess, issue that you see with people using the contracts?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons for developing and giving this webinar was really coming back off the back of having observed a number of cases where probably not the most suitable contract had been utilised for a job. By way of example, I'd had conversations with members regarding renovation jobs that they were in the process of doing, and rather than using the specific HIA alterations and additions contract, which is specifically drafted for renovations, they had instead just used a general lump sum building contract, which obviously isn't going to contain the same specific terms and conditions to really deal with that specific situation of carrying out renovations for a client, particularly in circumstances where the client might still be living at the home during the course of the works being carried out. So that is something that has arisen from time to time.
Okay, can the builder charge interest on late payments?
Yes, under the HIA contracts, under the schedule of particulars for the various building contracts, the builder has the ability to specify a rate, should I say, of interest to apply to any late payments. And in formulating that rate of interest, you have to be sure to ensure that it's a reasonable amount which is proportionate having regard to the actual value of the contract. So if, for example, you can't specify an amount of interest which would be excessive in the circumstances, it needs to be a reasonable amount.
Okay, great. Well, I think we have come to the end of the questions. So I've just put in there a note. If anybody's got any more questions, it's a good chance to jump in and get those answered directly from Michael. Otherwise, Michael has his email address, I believe. Yep, I've just moved my question box on the screen there. So any questions that you have, you can always email Michael. And as mentioned earlier, we have a range of webinars now, so you may even have some staff members that you want to get to watch some of those other webinars that Michael has done, because they are really straightforward and really helpful. So I'd suggest that as well. I have had members contact me to ask me if staff members can watch them as well, and that's not a problem at all. So if you've got any more questions, type them in. Wendy has sent through, is the bathroom, kitchen, laundry contract suitable when cabinetry is not being supplied as part of the work?
Yes, you can still use it in those particular circumstances, but the contract is drafted with sufficient breadth to really incorporate a broad range of circumstances relating to carrying out kitchen, bathroom and laundry style works, so you don't necessarily have to be, say, supplying and installing cabinetry in order to utilise that contract.
Great, so I hope that helped, Wendy. Any more questions, send them through quickly, or I will finish up and thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you again, Michael. These short, sharp webinars are always helpful. Sorry, just from that previous question about, I think it was about can you charge interest on late payment? Harish has asked, can the client argue? I'm not sure if you've finished typing that question in, Harish, but can the client argue? Might just want to see if you type in the rest of that question, Harish. So perhaps I guess he's asking whether the client has any comeback if you want to charge interest.
The only comeback, I suppose, which the client might seek to have is if, firstly, the progress payment which is overdue is not, in fact, overdue, or secondly, in the event that the client raises a legal dispute in relation to the amount of interest on the basis that the amount of interest is excessive. So for example, if you have a job, say, for building a new home for $300,000 and your rate of interest on late payments is 90%, then that would clearly be excessive, and that's something that the client might seek to contest.
Okay, and I've got the question. The rest of the question is a little bit different. So, can the client argue on refund of monies for unsatisfactory workmanship on a cost-plus contract?
Can the client, sorry, could you read that one out again, please,
Sure.
Kerry?
Can the client argue on refund of monies for unsatisfactory workmanship on a cost-plus contract?
Well, the starting point is that if works have been duly carried out and performed, then the client is obliged to make payment. If there's then a separate dispute regarding the quality of the work, so workmanship issues, then a separate issue arises as to how is that going to be dealt with. Will it be dealt with by way of the builder absorbing the costs of rectification, or will it be dealt with by way of the builder making some form of financial payment, such as in the nature of a refund, if you want to call it that, to the client, with a view to the client, say, engaging somebody else of their choosing to carry out the remediation work that they're seeking. But that's something which I suppose sits independently of the contract. That's a commercial decision.
Okay, and Christine has asked, do you use Form AC for alterations over 500,000?
You can still utilise the alterations and additions contract for jobs over $500,000. The I suppose only thing to note is that because the contract has been drafted to be compliant with the Home Building Contracts Act, one of the requirements of the Home Building Contracts Act is that for jobs between $7,500 and $500,000, a deposit of no greater than 6.5% of the contract price may be charged. So if you're going to be doing a renovation job over $500,000, then you're then free to nominate a higher amount of a deposit that you might seek to charge the client. That's one thing I'd note, but otherwise you can still utilise the contract.
Okay, great. So Christine, I hope that answered your question. I can't see any more questions coming through, so if you have typed one in and I haven't read it out, please just send it back through again. We might just wait 2 seconds for that. I see you have a golf day coming up, Michael. Are you going to that? I see it advertised on the bottom of your email signature.
Yes, yes, I'll probably be in attendance. So if any members are interested in having a swing and some lunch, do come down.
Good chance to catch you and get some one-on-one advice.
Yeah. Or alternatively, you prefer to talk in a more formal setting rather than on the golf field,
Yep.
then we can always set up a face-to-face meeting to go through any of the HIA contracts.
Okay, so people can actually come in person and meet with you as well?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay, sometimes it's easier to do that if you are local enough to be able to sit down and go through the documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And alternatively, there's always the option to just correspond by email, or alternatively have a conversation on the phone.
Yep, great. All right, well, I will wrap it up now. There are no more questions. So thank you again, Michael, and thank you everybody for joining us. I know everybody has probably got a very busy day, so I will sign off now and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry, and thank you everybody for participating today.